Hello, everybody. Welcome to Judson Memorial Church. How are you? Are you warmed up from this delicious soup in the back from Andrew? Round of applause for Andrew Moore in the back here with this astonishing soup. My name is Micah, and I'm the minister here at Judson Memorial Church. And before we get started, I just want to ask, is there anyone here who's at Judson for the first time tonight? Oh, wow. No newbies? I'm like looking all over. All right. Well, then you're just getting a reminder about this. You are actually in a church, like a real church that still does like churchy things on the very floor that you are sitting on, but you are also in a church that has never known how to be a church unless we are welcoming artists into our space to share with us the stories that they are bursting to tell. At Judson, we have always believed that artists have the potential to serve as our modern-day prophets. They show us where we've been, they show us who we are, and they show us what we can become. And I cannot think of a prophetic artist who has come into my life that I admire more than the person who is about to take us on a journey for the next hour or so. So I want you to remember that this space is always yours. I'm always in the back, and I'd love to talk with you if you have ideas for this space, or if you'd like to support the things that happen in this space, I can connect you to ways to do that. So always remember that this space belongs to each and every one of you, but tonight it most especially belongs to Judson's own André Daughtry.
Thank you, Micah, for the introduction. Some of you may know, or I see many people that I do know, very familiar faces, but I used to work here. I was the Minister of the Arts here, so I've heard Micah's speech over 1,000,000 times. And I've always thought, like, should a person come and actually run up to match that energy? But then I ended up just walking up here anyway, so excuse me for not matching your energy, Micah. It's unbeatable. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'll give you a little talk about what we're going to see. It's such a privilege to see so many faces, familiar and new faces as well, in the space. So let's see. In 2019, after I finished my residency at the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, I had this inspiration to do something really hard. And so I decided to get on a plane and to go down to Colombia and find an indigenous tribe to have a conversation with, if they would allow me to talk with them. Because I went to Union. Union has a great ecological institute. And inside that institute, there is the Original Caretakers Program, which is a consortium of shamans from around the world. And let's just say shaman is a Siberian term. Every important spiritual person in the different tribes through Latin America have different names, but we'll just say shaman for more generic understanding. But went down there and got to meet a tribe called the Misak. They're in the south of Colombia, in the department of Cauca, getting close to Ecuador. And I had a conversation with the president of the Misak University. There's an indigenous university that I was taken to through my contacts through the consortium that Union Seminary has. And through meeting the president, we struck a deal that I can come down and teach English to the students, and they would allow me to stay close by them on the reservation, observe, and possibly do a work of art with them. My concern in going down and wanting to be with an indigenous tribe really comes with questions of ecology, and it's almost a buzzword now, sustainability. And I just wanted to kind of go the unbuzzworthy route of what does that actually mean to be sustainable. From my observations, I've really been paying attention to our green movements have been having huge conversations bent on technological discoveries and advances. And I really wanted to know what was an indigenous perspective when it comes to talking about Tesla, electric cars, batteries, solar panels. And there's a lot of problematics and good things with those elements, but I wanted to know what does that mean. When we are making our purchase for things that are supposedly sustainable, we know that there's elements that need to be mined, lithium and cobalt, and usually in the world it's people of color and indigenous folks who are going to be bearing the brunt of that type of not great work. And so I really wanted to kind of know what that perspective was. The pandemic happened, because I went back to 2019. We had a positive contract that we drew up, but then had to wait for 2 years, obviously, for the pandemic to start moving on. And then finally got to move down there in September of 2021. My wife followed right after, my wife Kay. And so we both teach English at the Indigenous University. And because of reasons that I completely understand, we were accepted to be able to live among them, but not until this very past year, which is 2 years of us living with them, that I actually got permission from the tribal leaders to actually do the art project that I had in my mind. So I had something that's there, and finally, these past couple of months, been able to start to execute that. But what we're going to watch right now is a project that I did when I first arrived. It's a commission from Black Mountain College Museum, which is a museum that still holds the archives of the first experimental art school here in America, in Asheville, North Carolina, which is Black Mountain College. And so their commissions happen to be inviting artists to do like a kind of diary or video log, travel log, and of artists who are in the middle of their process of doing something. So being that I didn't quite yet have permission to do an official project, I did the travel log of a diary of what it meant to actually be living in Cauca, Colombia, and also do a thing, a term. I think I invented it, but we'll have to see. I teach a class, experimental documentary class at Hunter College in the MFA program, and I teach a class that I created called Sketching with the Lens. And so what we're about to see is sketching for wilderness. And what do I mean by sketching? When we're talking about paintings, we have charcoal and we do our preparations for the larger project. Same thing with sculpture. We have our molds before the cast. But also I think that we should also be experimenting with the lens and being able to not just problem solve, but see new ways of being able to have people read your work by being a lens-based artist. And so what we're going to see is a mix of the travelogue and my experimentations with using the drone. And we'll talk a little bit later about this history of mapping and cartography that I'm working with conceptually with using drone photography. But we'll see in sketches these tries or essays of how we can actually use the lens to be able to experiment with our relationship between nature and human societies, okay? I hope I didn't talk too long for the introduction, but I just wanted to kind of give you guys a little heads up, like this is not the piece. This is not the full project. I'm working on the project which is called Wilderness, but this is a travelogue that I think will be great for us to get into the conversation with my lovely panelists that we're gonna have a talk after the 35-minute film presentation. All right? All right, great. So let's get on. Thank you.
Amui pireve purenu undatega kemikan.
Territory is the most sensitive element of our lives. All the cultural, environmental, economic, and spiritual processes are articulated in it. The land, which is a dynamic and articulating element of our cultural life processes, is the space where knowledge is practiced, history is woven, and cultural values are developed. We coexist with nature and interaction with other beings, always seeking harmony and balance of the biodiversity.
Velas.
Ok, dos construcciones verbales. Tenemos must, es deber. Dos formas de decir poder, to be able to y can. Ok. To be able to es un perifrase, el verbo es to be, vamos a conjugar to be. Ok. Pero can, la diferencia es que, Patricia, can no se conjuga. Es I can, you can, he can. No es he can. Basta.
Listo.
Okay. Pero tienes una foto.
Sí, ya.
Ok.
Ese es video.
¿Y ahí qué hago?
Actúe. Ríe.
Una cosa como English. Okay, good. Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Excuse the little technical, I'm sorry, some of the portraits and a couple of frames were cut off at the top. It was something up with the projector. My apologies for that, we didn't catch that. Eva, do you mind joining? So we're going to have a discussion about not necessarily the travelogue per se, but some of the intentions in the work. So I'm happy to be joined by Eva Mayhabal. And I have one more guest that's going to join us by Skype. Some of you might remember Skype. It's a little old school, but I like how it looks. And there's no time limit. You don't have to pay. So hold on. Here we go. Going to be joined by a friend real fast. Okay, there it is. Let's see if he picks up. Hey, Sam.
Hello, hello.
All right, excellent, excellent. Can you hear me? You hear me? Fine?
Yep, sounds good.
All right, excellent, great. So I'm joined by two wonderful folks. So let me read a little bio here. Eva Mayhabal, born in Toluca, Mexico, is a cultural advocate and curator, collaborating with artists and creatives in the production of exhibitions, text, and events. She was a co-curator of Bronx Calling, the Bronx Fifth Biennial at the Bronx Museum of Arts, and a co-director at Transmitter, a collaborative curatorial initiative in Brooklyn, New York. Her writing has been featured in exhibition catalogs and various art publications, and I have a special place in my heart for Eva because she helped do the smudging and opening ceremony for our wedding last year here at Judson. So thank you so much, Eva, for being here. And then Sam Mickey, PhD, is a scholar, teacher, and writer in the environmental humanities, focusing on ethics and ontologies of non-humans across multiple perspectives, existential phenomenology, comparative cross-cultural philosophy, deconstruction, ecofeminism, and eco-criticism. Sam teaches in the Theology and Religious Studies Department at the Environmental Studies Program at the University of San Francisco. He's Skyping in from Sonoma right now as we speak. And he has also taught at Dominican University of California, Pacifica Graduate Institute, and the California Institute of Integral Studies. And he has worked for several years at the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale. And quite an excellent editor and author as well. So just give us a hand for both of these panelists that are here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and really nice to meet you, Sam.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Conversation.
Cool. So I kind of gave a pre-question to Sam, but I think Sam is probably one of the more qualified people to take this one on. And so just wanted to ask Sam, when we talk about indigenous cosmology, indigenous culture and spiritual traditions, there's a word that we have, it's called religion, but what are your ideas on using that term for when we're speaking of cosmologies and indigeneity?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's an important question, and there's no easy answer to it. Religion's a highly contested category. And of course, indigenous people are going to say, first of all, that's not my language. The word religion has its roots in Latin. There's a word religio. And so it's like, okay, that's a Latin word. This isn't our word. But more importantly, the way we use the word religion today actually started like in the 18th century. It started during the European colonial era. And so, of course, indigenous people have been severely put upon and displaced by colonial culture. So they really don't want that word applied to them. And really even other cultures as well, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, they didn't think of themselves as religions. those were categories that European colonial culture was using to try and identify what in other cultures resembled Christianity. And so Christianity was always the paradigm of what religion is supposed to be, and everything else is being measured against it. So it's too Christocentric, it's too Eurocentric, and it doesn't really grasp the living realities that indigenous communities go through. And another thing to say as well, religion in the modern period is always distinguished from science. And indigenous people do not tend to think that way. And people talk about things like indigenous science, or sometimes it's called traditional ecological knowledge. And so once you say religion, that separates the religious side of what they do from the scientific side of what they do, and really misses the kind of organic living experience of what it's like to be part of an indigenous community. So these days, people will say things like indigenous traditions instead of saying religion. That can confuse people too, since tradition often sounds like it's frozen in the past. And these traditions are not frozen in the past. They're very much alive, growing, and changing. So another term people often use is lifeway. Indigenous communities have integrated way of life that includes things that we generally separate out in modern societies: politics, economics, science, religion, education. For indigenous communities, they're often woven together so tightly that they really can't be disentangled with separate terms like that. So very good reasons to have an allergy to calling indigenous traditions religions. So indigenous lifeway, indigenous traditions, indigenous spirituality, those help get around this category of religion.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. I can say something about how that influenced my wanting to do this project, but Eva, why don't you go ahead?
I had a couple of thoughts that I had been jotting down, and one of them is with this idea of notion of interwoven understanding of where and how we live. And one of the things that came to mind is this constant reminder of a separation that comes through because of how we're using the language and religion, and also a separation of what it means to have that in church and state. And all of that is interwoven in our constant disagreement and clashing with what it means to live sustainably or ecologically, in that what in many traditions is considered important, sacred, that has its own entity and embodiment, and in what we see every day in mountains, rivers, lakes, that under the system and Western lens, they are property. They are a commodity of some sort. And the value there is stripped from its spiritual identity and from its like very real, fruitful, and everyday need for our survival. You know, and it is because of the language that we prescribed into it. Everything from the business and legal side of things creates, and I think that's why so many times I hear the reference of capitalism being the religion of the United States. And so this really just kind of brings it full circle, and it's wrapping up a lot of my own thought process into this. Yeah.
Exactly, thank you. And for me, dealing with these binaries, as Sam had said, where you have science on one side, and then you have tradition or spiritual tradition, or all of the ways that we're trying to describe cosmology, or in Colombia, they'd say cosmovision or cosmovision. I, as a lens-based artist, wanted to look at, well, what does my medium have to do with that? How is a lens connected to possibly that binary? So I say this all the time. Why I love being a lens-based artist is we have this man-made object that gives us certain types of facts or truths. We have a lens for the telescope, lets us know that we go around the sun and not the other way around. We have microscopes, so we can see very, very small building blocks of existence. But also the lens is able to bring us intangible things. That's why we go to the movies. We learn about love. We learn about community. By playing around with sketches and some of the beginning blocks of the project of wilderness that I'm going to share with everyone shortly, I was looking at this binary of the lens telling truth, or the lens giving us fact, and so that's on one side. But I think that has to be disturbed, because if we say on the one side we're trying to save the planet and we're trying to save ourselves, and so we're going to get batteries and solar panels and it's the technology, the scientific way that is actually going to do it, then we're missing out on all of the intangible conversation, which is, but what about the spiritual way? Is there a place for us to say, how do we become in harmony again with nature, not just how do we invent something on top of nature again. So me investigating using the drone, which is this other new technology of being able to look at areas, looking at how the lens has been used for mapping historically, even when we get down to concepts of manifest destiny. Those early photographers would go out into the virgin West and bring photos back where there's no indigenous folks in the photo. It's just land waiting for us to be able to take over from, this is probably an overused term now, from the sea to the sea, or from the river to the sea, but just from the, obviously the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and the camera, the photography lens, along with the ideology of manifest destiny, really worked together to be able to map out the rest of the continent for us. And so just, again, looking at things in a binary way automatically puts us into a box. And to say that a indigenous way of looking at our relationship to the world is a spiritual way, but it's not a negation of technology as well.
Especially because we're in a contemporary space, right? We're looking at also how these movements have continued for well over 500 years. And that's what, in some places, it has been neglected and hasn't been harbored, and it hasn't been like given the credit that it has the constant movement, not just survival, but movement and thriving. And it's important to recognize where like new technology will uplift that.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, definitely. Sam, what do you think of positives or harms of binaries, especially when we have broken down, obviously, spiritual, technological? What do you think of the binaries as being a consistent part of our thinking when possibly there is a new way of thinking that might need to be incorporated?
Right. Yeah, it's been a very big part of modern society to think not just in distinctions or polarities, but in binaries where you have like mutually exclusive opposites. And so it's one thing to say my thoughts are different than my sensations. That's a distinction. But when we treat them as mutually exclusive opposites, we get into some trouble. And we start to think not just of difference, but of dissociation. So the mind is dissociated from the body. Humans are dissociated from nature. Science becomes dissociated from spirituality and religion. And we start to think of things as so separate that we have trouble understanding how they can communicate or overlap, how we can have mediation between them. So it's a deeply destructive way of thinking. The remedy for that is relational thinking. Instead of thinking things as mutually exclusive opposites, we can think of them as relational partners that inform and transform one another. And so our knowledge about the world, our science, can intersect deeply and transformatively with our faith in the world, and our faith in other people, our faith in higher powers. So faith and science don't have to be seen as mutually exclusive opposites. They can be seen as mutually constitutive, co-creative. And that's what you see with indigenous communities. You see people interacting with one another and with their land in a way that doesn't separate humans from nature. It doesn't separate myself from my neighbor. Everybody's seen to be part of a tangled web where every component is changing and being changed by every other component. And in that kind of dynamic dance, people are able to live sustainably and thrive on their land base for not only hundreds of years, but thousands of years. And by contrast, industrial civilization showed up a little over 200 years ago, and we're already in a climate crisis, a mass extinction event, air pollution, water pollution. So the relational way of thinking that's embedded in indigenous communities might be exactly the kind of thinking and feeling that can help us through our current crisis.
Thank you. Thank you.
I keep thinking about how, we're in a place where as much as we want to take steps forward, we take like 3 steps back. And I think so much of it has to do with our dialogue and the way that we express and understand really big buzzwords like sustainability and what it means to create more technology on top of that to find that sustainability. Or also another one is abundance. It's like I don't think we want an abundance of things. I think we want sufficiency. We want enough. We want for you and for me, not just like an overload of everything. And we're also moving so quickly that the time that it takes to study and find that connection that we see and have seen studied in so many traditions throughout the world around dualities and binaries and connecting our minds and our bodies and ourselves to our neighbors, to our families, to our circles, to our communities, that takes time. And I feel like we're always on a timer now. Yeah. We're always looking at a clock. We're always on a time. Industrialization has put us on a clock so quick, 9 to 5, clock in, clock out every day, that time to actually understand our connections is so difficult. It's so difficult. And I mean, I think that there's something in video too to tie it into this capturing of photography and video that you're working with these time constraints and also elongating them, right? There's a certain kind of control there of processing time, of seeing a landscape slower, of almost forcing your eye to look, to keep looking, to find like the 30 shades of green to one tree, and to follow a road that has been followed over and over and over again. And I think that's where we can learn to use our minds again, to imagine, because that feels like it's also lacking, our imagination, to just sit with it, sit with ourselves. And it's a practice, meditation's a practice throughout so many traditions that we have to take our time back.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed that with my sketching with the drone and then the soundtrack that was put on there. I after being in the environment for a long amount of time where there's green, rolling hills, horses are greeting you when you come out of your house, the chicken that you might be eating later on that day, but you got to say hi earlier in the morning. Just everything is very relational, and there's also the meditational of being in the moment. We walk so much from the Misak University back to our apartment. It's a 50-minute walk, and we do it often. because maybe the what's called a colectivo, the public transport, might come once every 45 minutes or once every 2 hours, and everybody's just walking. And so just the always being in relationship to what's around. From me sketching, I noticed that I am going to keep these long takes so that we do have these meditative moments. But when speaking of binaries, and again, I already talked about how I'm entering it as a lens-based artist, where I'm going to talk a bit about in the work, this relationship to how the lens is either a partner to creating the relationship or not. You know, the lens has been used to say that's those folks and this is that land, or it's something that can bring them into proximity, into relationship to each other. But I had to also try to figure out what was the core thing that the Misak had that I don't have, and I'm learning to have, and that is this understanding of place. I know I was born in Jamaica, Queens, and I grew up in New Jersey, down the street from Princeton University, so that's had a huge effect on who I am, how I've navigated the world, but never really thought about it as being like, but the place is the thing that is carrying you through wherever it is that you go. And the Misak 100% have that idea. There's no story, there's no genesis without telling the story of the actual land. And that land and that relationship to each individual body and the collective body is what is the basis of the preservation or the sustainability. It's all about the previous generations, the present, and the actual future. And so everyone is actually working for that connectivity the entire time. And so outside of just kind of approaching it as a lens-based artist, because if I was a sculptor, I would be having conversations about materiality in that kind of way, but I'm doing a lens, and so it's 2D. And so what was the linchpin that I could really explore? And it was this binary of site and place. And when we talk about site, and we get into how site is a concept that is very Western, where you have cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. And the fact of being able to have sight also was very helpful in the age of exploration and colonization, because when you have place, you have people, you have history, you have animals, you have food that comes from the nature, so everything is in a relationship. Sight, you don't have to have that. And so when you're mapping out, well, you take the western part of Latin America, the Spanish, and you take the eastern part of Latin America, the Portuguese, that's why we have Brazil, and the Spanish had the western part all the way to the Philippines, that's why the Philippines, they don't speak Spanish now, but they all have Spanish last names, Filipinos. And so when you divide up the world and divide and conquer, and you use sight as your metric of measuring, well, then you don't have to have any respect for anything that was there before you arrived, before you actually mapped it out with your Western grid system. So from being there these 2 years, from taking the drone out and taking it for a walk, because I'm practicing with it very often, I came to realize that photographically or cinematically, that the conversation of sight and place was what I really, really needed to highlight. And how does one actually come to experience what the difference is, and maybe sight, how can I make sight seem like something that is empty, even though it's still something that we can get to, but actually not get to know, if we don't have all of the other parameters of place that give us a embodied relationship to somewhere that we're actually going.
I think that right there, that discomfort of being somewhere and not knowing, that is like the angst of the explorer. That's why they have the need to put a name and a grid to everything, because they can't sit comfortably with not knowing. They can't sit comfortably with just being there. and just going along with whatever's happening there.
Yeah.
And I, and that grid haunts us to this day. It's why, districts get divided the way they do in our everyday neighborhoods. But making that distinction of site and place, it brought to mind what a dear brother shared with me one day. He mentioned in an introduction to a panel, said, I come to this place from, and he began to name his peoples and his place, his Lakota tribe and other specifics, and that we just kind of continue the conversation around this place that is carried, of understanding, of lineage, of history, that is carried with you wherever you go, so that you have a place, and when you arrive to another place, that homage that you present and that respect of acknowledging where you are, and that you have this place with you, you are in this new place, and there is so much here that you don't know, but you can only introduce yourself. And it comes down just to being polite, but it's really so much about what you carry with you, that identity and that history that you don't forget. And we've seen it over and over again because it teaches us. And that I think what you grasp onto is this moment where you have a lot of youth, you're in a schooling, in a place of learning, that you're propelling forward by learning your history. And all of that is, I'm really interested in the details of the way you're experiencing this place, and how someone may take you on to experience that place with them, or show you their favorite view or their favorite plant, or when you take someone to try your favorite food. Like, these are experiences of place. And that's what I see with all the young people that you're working with too, that you've captured in the video log, that they have so much knowledge that even though they're there to learn it, they already have it in them. You carry your place with you. And you can only see that when someone has so much connection and presence in their place.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Sam, got a question for you. When speaking of place, and we have kind of broken down this relationship between site, which is kind of placeless, even though it's signifying place or a part of geography, but not necessarily place as in what place really holds. What does that mean when we are talking about our inter-existence, meaning our relationship to other species, relationship to the flora and the fauna, the mountains and the rivers? What in your mind do you think of a human reinvestigation into places in our investigation of reharmonization with all those other elements that we share the planet with?
Oh, that's a good question, and crucial for our time. When people relate to place versus site, you're empowered by the other beings that you share your place with. The flora, the fauna, the air, the water, the soil. You share power together. There's something about living on a site where you try to control it. You have power over it. And of course, this is the history of colonial expansion. It's the history of industrialization, of capital exploitation of resources. What you see is people controlling the land as if they have power over it. When you relate to place, you have power with the land, with the life, with the air, with the water. So such a huge distinction between power over and power with. We even hear this when people say things like, humans live on Earth, as if we're on top of it. We're not on top of it. Look above you. There's clouds, there's the sky, there's the atmosphere. There's, in my case right now in Sonoma, California, a lot of rain. And so we're not just top of the earth, we're active participants in the unfolding journey of the earth community. That's a relationship to place. You don't live on your place, you live with your place. And when you start to live with plants and animals and air and water, instead of trying to control them, then we can make a transition that's so important for our time. This is probably the great work of our time, to carry out a transition from a period in which humans have a destructive presence on the planet to a period in which humans have a mutually enhancing relationship to the rest of our Earth community.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of what my discoveries have turned into after doing sketches, and then a year after that, finally getting permission to actually do a work of art with the community. I decided that I not only wanted to do an experimental documentary film, but I also wanted to do a photography book. And the photography book helped me really kind of like pinpoint how to create a structure of being able to juxtapose site and place. And the other development is I figured that instead of me coming, because place is all of the story of the folks, that I was inadequate to do anything just by myself. Like, yes, I can show you the travelogue, and now I'm more zen because there's 100% more green around me, but that's not actually doing justice to the place and to the people that are there. So I decided to actually collaborate with one of our students at the Misak University, so that this work of art would be him being a guide. And I'm a part of being a guide because of bringing the technology and bringing certain questions, but it's really based on what his experiences are as being a young Misak University student. And so I'm going to show, so Sam, you'll still be here, but we're just going to take you off from being a movie-size character, and I would just bring in the beginnings of the book structure that I've come to think is the way that I need to continue working. So I am not really all that great with typography. As soon as this comes, this is just, we're just imagining what the cover of the book can be, but I'm just looking at a structure to be able to work on. So this is Miguel. And this is the Lake Marquesa, which is a very sacred site to the Misak people. They actually go here to ask for permission for journeys or endeavors that they are about to take on business-wise or whatever. And they ask for permission from the mountains, from the lake, from the rivers, from the land. And so what I decided to do with my drone, and I went to Strand Books and I picked up like 2 drone photography books, and you know, everybody's crazy about, oh, this God's eye perspective, and look at the land, we can see it differently. And I was just completely bored with the 2 books. I was just, what a waste of time of like having a different perspective, but basically just saying, well, with my drone, I was able to get this shot because the new drone's got 10 hours of battery or 10 minutes of battery as opposed to the drone from before. It's just really kind of like not interesting conversation about how a new technology that can be used for good, bad, or whatever, but just as an artist, I'm just looking and saying, no, I think there's something that we can say about place with having a different perspective. But at the end of the day, usually the photography books usually have that kind of perspective where you're looking straight down. Now, this is the lake, Marquesa. But I was saying, you know, how do I make the drone photography more place, or is it only going to be in the realm of just sight? And so what I came up with was, well, why don't I use the drone to create this new technological perspective, but then make it be as banal can be as far as sight is concerned. And so I always write or have some kind of text with my photos. And so I decided that instead of saying where this is Sylvia, Cauca, Colombia, that I'm just going to actually label the longitude and the latitude. And so I figured that that was going to be the best way for me to actually express what sight is, which is it can be beautiful, it can be engaging because of the use of a different perspective, but at the end of the day, how do I make it not have any of the weight that place actually holds?
Just seeing the coordinates, my first impression was the cartography of it, the legacy of mapping, and just giving us a universal system of finding our place in the world. And, you know, and it's still confusing, and it's still, like, as much as it's precise, it's abstracted, and it's actually very much only meant for a certain someone to find. So it does make it very global and abstract, and just lets me focus on the beauty of it. And I think that works in the favor of then just focusing on the place, on the photograph, without having to wonder where it is or what it is, without the weight of it giving it name and place. But yeah, it holds on to that Western lens for a moment.
Yeah, and then I kind of figured that, well, instead of trying to be a purist where I'm going to use this technology and force it or try to make it tell me about place, I said I'm going to use it in the best way that it can be, which is just information. Seductive because, you know, you can still have attractive photos, the world is beautiful, but it doesn't have all of the weight that an indigenous person would bring to knowing territory. And so with Miguel, I decided to allow him to be a guide for how to tell me the story of the place. So I was inspired by the Underground Railroad, obviously here during our slave history in the United States, and the truth and possibly debatable myth of lyrics from gospel songs and gospel hymns actually being used as the indications or the directions for how to escape to the north. So if you have a hymn that says, you know, cross the Jordan, it's understood that in that hymn, that was sign or code for cross the Columbus River from a southern slave state over to a free state like Ohio. So I was inspired by the fact that you can have a map that relies on indications that are not cardinal units, but indications of language, indications of ceremony, indications of ritual. So these are the things, indications of music and cosmology. And these are the things that help us and help indigenous folks map the journey of their lives, geographically, metaphorically, and lives, and how to get around. So what I have started to do with Miguel is we go to the sites that I've shot with the drone, and then go back and I use either the drone or my camera to go back to the same sites, and I ask him to write about those sites. And Kay and I, my wife, have really discovered that Miguel is actually, he was an underground poet because he just writes this beautiful text of the significance of the sites. So hopefully I can read. At the top, it's going to be in the indigenous Misak language, which is called Nwam Gwambiana, and I don't pronounce it really well, even just the name of the language, and I definitely don't read the language at all. But that top paragraph is going to be mirrored down in English because we have long conversations and work on translations. The cool thing is the things that are very difficult to translate into English.
I was gonna ask, there's like certain ways that I feel like maybe are reflected in the poetry and that kind of specification of language that is part of the land.
Yeah.
And so translating it must be a challenge.
Yeah, well, it's virtually impossible for specific concepts, and so I try to find certain maybe archaic and no longer used concepts that exist in English coming from a Latin or a Greek to try to do a approximation, but never really hitting it. But I'm trying to leave some of those things to feel strange so that a person doesn't feel that they're reading something that is an exact replica or a perfect copy. In that way. So I'll just read Miguel's introduction that I translated. So it goes from Misak to Spanish, and then I go from Spanish to English. So this is Miguel's introduction to this scene, this place. So water dreams, eye of water, lagoon, water roads, veins of water, rivers and seas of dreams. What would life be without our crystal clear water? Before writing the dreams of a lifetime, I want to thank the firmament, the soil, and subsoil. I always thank the great speakers of Logos and the holders of the living word. They are the ones who give us dreams, advice, guide our way through the feeling, providing freshness and harmony, even though we have forgotten the countless changes or the evolution of modern man. He and she live and survive in time and space in the life of the Misak, or ancestral people, Wampia. I would also like to thank the Misak University for having received me in their space and for the formation of Misak life to their own teachers in solidarity, and also to respectfully highlight the students who year after year have left their mark and their grain of corn so that this process and journey of the Native peoples continues to remain and survive with great firmness in the global world. And I also want to leave a message to the new seeds that are forging and working on their dreams that they should not falter in the journey of this life. We will have wonderful moments and moments where we will find stumbling blocks that will try to prevent us from each of our dreams. We are unique and brave, so let us flourish and shine before the world. Introduction. On a very sunny Tuesday, accompanied by the freshness of the wind, we arrived at a lagoon that is on top of the mountain called the Marquesa Silvia Cauca. With the guidance of some supportive foreign teachers of the English language, we proceeded to walk in this plan I call Water Dreams, Eye of Water, Lagoon. Water roads, veins of water, rivers, and seas of dreams. Before starting to take the photographs and dreaming about this new journey, I asked permission from the spirit of the lagoon, and I also thank for allowing me to reach its space. In the same way, I had a time of meditation and nostalgia, because in that place, a young man died, very young age, where I know that his spirit is still there, latent and clean like the water that occupies that lake. I wonder what was his last thought, and sigh before being cold and covered by the water. His dreams, his goals, trips, and experiences were extinguished in every millimeter of water that covers the great lagoon. At that same moment, I wanted to get closer to it, to touch and feel its crystalline drops. But it was impossible because around it, I felt its shifting earth, and it's prevented me from getting closer. In the same way, I felt the cold that someone else was trying to talk to me and tell me that it was unnecessary to touch their waters. Here begins the path to write my dreams and experiences of my life spiral. So this is the introduction of Miguel and I's relationship of me photographing a site and turning it into a place that he gives the context to the places that I would like to photograph.
Working with him in his language, do you find that this is becoming like a kind of archive too for language, like for these expressions of, because it you know, he's bringing in almost, there's no timeline to the stories that we're already hearing, like 3 or 4 stories about the place, about water, about people, and I'm just fascinated by the capturing of the language that is also happening simultaneously with each image.
Yeah.
So that's quite an endeavor.
Well, Sam, that goes back to the question that you had asked me when you interviewed me for Yale Ecology and Religion Institute. What am I going to do with the language? And I had said to you in our interview, I think it was about 1.5 years ago, well, I can't learn an indigenous language and Spanish at the exact same time. That would be a little too much of a challenge. So I wasn't very clear about how language was going to work. But the clarity is come through with what it is that you just said about actually it being an archive. I really appreciate how Miguel even mentions K and I as being a part of Catalyst, but I love the fact that I'm not being the storyteller.
Yeah.
So I'm the catalyst to someone telling a story very differently than what they would be saying, because they're doing something with an outsider and feeling a certain kind of freedom, because that's not a normal thing to just say we're just going to do an art project in that community. There's one contemporary artist, her name is Juliet Morales, and she's a good friend of ours, and that's the only one out of a reservation of 30,000 people. Yeah. So, Sam, I'm answering your question late, but I know now that the language is really about archiving the moments that we're sharing, the relationality to how I discover place and how Miguel gets to express place outside of just the context of speaking to it traditionally.
Yeah, and I think it also allows for an understanding of traditional, but the contemporary, and that is crucial because, you know, this is living history, what starts to happen, and in the way that it's expressed is not at all the way we understand history in a Western sense or through our history books. It is through storytelling. It's through place. That's the only way I can really express it.
Yeah. Sam, and we'll give you the last word and thoughts here, because I want to be cognizant of folks' times. Because I sent you an early copy of the PDF, and with our conversation of site and place, and this archive that we're talking about, where the creation of the language is an archive of our experience together as protagonists and creator, but then also archive of how I get to know these spots when I'm there on my own, and Miguel knowing them new. And then when the project is presented to the larger community, this different lens, literally, of the places that they inhabit that are all part of their understanding of territory. What are your thoughts, or what struck you, or what translated to you about this structure that I have that I'm working on after you being a part of Seeing Sketches 1.5 years ago?
Yeah, thanks. It's really been such a pleasure to get to see this work develop over time. And between Seeing Sketches and also seeing what you're working on with the book, one of the things that really struck me that's so profound is that you present very difficult tensions. You juxtapose history with the present. Indigenous society with industrial society, where you have fancy technologies like drone photography. and your perspective and Miguel's perspective. You're juxtaposing images with words, and even within words, you're juxtaposing the English language with the language of the Misak people. So it's all of these juxtapositions, these coincidences of opposites that are difficult to resolve. And it reminds us that there's no simple answer to what it means to live on Earth. It's something we have to come to together. There's no one horizon of meaning that has all the answers. We find the answers when we bring these different horizons together. Word and image, you and Miguel, historical, contemporary, indigenous, non-indigenous. So I think you're really bringing people into an experience of the tensions that really matter in our lives right now. And you don't resolve them in any simple way. You really leave it to the viewer or the reader to have to engage it themselves from their horizon to see what kind of meaning they're going to find in it for themselves.
So thank you, and so we have. There still is like a binary that is actually existing, but I guess I'm attempting to create a relationship. That's why at the end of the day I decided, well, no, I'll use the drone for what it does, which is can do really boring photography unless you actually put it into a context that there's a tension. And then now we can actually have an investigation of like how the technology, how the site is actually doing good or not doing good in relationship to a more holistic understanding of place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Giving us context.
Given the context.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool.
Wow.
Well, we'll close it there. And I just want to remind folks that the project Wilderness is still being made, looking to do a book and a film. And a film costs money because there is a crew. And I have some wonderful folks who I've been working with in Bogota. And so thank you so much for coming. I didn't want to just call this a fundraiser. I wanted people's awareness to be raised about all of these concerns and topics that we're talking about. But from my wife, you can pick up a little appeal letter that if anyone feels as if they want to continue to, or to support the work that I'm actually doing, this project Wilderness is fiscally sponsored with a Fractured Atlas, so there is a tax exemption that is a part of it. But again, I just wanted everyone to be able to experience the process that I'm going through. But if you are able to donate at all to the paying of finishing up the project. We've been there for 2.5 years, and I hope to be able to come back to New York by the end of the 3rd year. We'll see how long it takes, but any kind of donation or contribution would be very, very helpful to really bringing this, this conversation of tensions and relationships, hopefully to an end product that can not be an end to itself, but be an opening further to the conversation that we had today. All right. Thank you to Eva.
Thank you, and congratulations on getting this started. Conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to Sam from California. Thank you so much. Thanks, man. All right. Bye-bye.